she wouldn't overtly want to criticize Harry's wife, but she made it quite clear, particularly towards the end after they'd left, that she'd really made a very great effort to make a success of their royal life, and I think she felt very disappointed by it. And I think there was definitely a sense, or those around her were certain that she saw narcissistic tendencies.
Hi, Kinsey Schofield here. Welcome to Crown and Conflict, a series dedicated to dissecting the most riveting royal scandals in history. But today we're not necessarily talking about scandals. We're talking about some good news, a very beautiful new book that's available. This week, I'm joined by Robert Hardman, author of Elizabeth II in Private, in Public, The Inside Story. And this is an incredible behind-the-scenes look at Queen Elizabeth II with rare access to her inner circle and figures like President Donald Trump, humble brag. Robert Hardman, congratulations on all of the success. I'm sure you anticipated, a lot of lovely feedback, but the amount of positive feedback I've seen involving this book has to bring a smile to your face.
Well, it does. Hello, Kinsey, and thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, it's been great. I mean, I would say that it's more a reflection on the subject of the book than on the book itself. I mean, we are in the week of the centenary of Elizabeth II, and I wrote the book to obviously tie in with that. And I think it's just a moment which just brings back a lot of happy memories, of poignant memories. And I think I certainly found when I was writing the book that a lot of people who might not normally want to talk to a journalist or had never spoken on the subject before, they were happy to talk to me about Elizabeth II just because they had this very warm memory of her. And that included, as you said, President Donald Trump.
I love that. All right. So the book explores how the Queen navigated personal and, global crises, balancing duty with real life pressures, and led with that signature quiet authority, which we don't see much of these days. Uh, it gives us a much more personal sense of one of history's most enduring public figures. One of the biggest headlines tied to your book centers and this is not necessarily on the positive side, but it centers on the revelations around Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. And you described the Queen's handling of Andrew as a lasting misstep, but also a moment where duty ultimately prevailed, which I think is important to stress. Was that the clearest example of her being torn between the crown and motherhood, or the crown and her family?
Well, that's a very good question. Yes, I mean it was certainly one of them. I think what's interesting is you look at her through her life, through her reign, early on when these family crises came along, and there was one very soon after she came to the throne when her sister wanted to marry her late father's equerry, who was divorced, and this was completely unthinkable at the time. And her reaction to that was to sort of hope it goes away, just to sort of push it to one side. The equerry, Peter Townsend, he was sort of sent abroad, and the Queen just sort of hoped that this relationship would fizzle out, which over a couple of years it did. But that was the sort of approach early on. But nonetheless, it was still her as Queen laying down the law to sort of protect the institution. And then we get to the sort of the 90s and Charles and Diana and all the problems there. She's trying to she again hopes that things will sort of sort themselves out, and they don't. And eventually she sort of says, well, you're going to have to get divorced. But it took a matter of years. But as she got older, along with the story with Andrew and also with Harry and Meghan, she became more decisive. I mean, once these things became a major problem, she just dealt with them. It was very painful. She hated doing it. She said to one of my interviewees that when she had to effectively sack Andrew from public life after his disastrous TV interview in 2019, that was one of the lowest moments of her life. She was very upset about it, but the institution came first. I mean, as a mother, she would have probably rather wished to sort of just ignore it, hope it goes away. I'm sure it'll get better. innocent until proved guilty, all that sort of stuff. That would have been her personal approach. But as monarch, as head of the institution, she knew Andrew was doing very great damage to the institution and he had to be jettisoned, and he was.
Do you think that the king perhaps resents kind of inheriting the Andrew problem, or do you think that he was in the same space as his mom, innocent until proven guilty, everything will work out the way it's supposed to?
He was certainly to start with. I think he was quite charitable towards his brother. He was certainly much nicer to him than we all expected. I think a lot of people thought that once Charles was king, Andrew would just be thrown out of his big house, and that didn't happen. I mean, it partly didn't happen because legally you can't just do that, but also I think the king took the view that um, that sort of innocent till proved guilty line, as long as Andrew keeps a low profile, doesn't do anything stupid, he will be tolerated unless the situation changes. Then what happened with two things. One was when the king tried to move him out of Royal Lodge, his big house, and offered him smaller accommodation, but cheaper accommodation at Frogmore Cottage, which used to belong to Harry and Meghan. Andrew said, "No, no, I'm not going. I'm staying put. I will fund it myself." And the king said, "Okay, well, in that case, I'm cutting off your allowance." The king did give him an allowance because he needs money for basic staff and just the regular day-to-day living expenses. The king cut all that off, so Andrew was left on his own. Then, when it turned out that Andrew had lied when he said that he'd severed all his links with Jeffrey Epstein back in 2010, and that he'd had nothing more to do with it, when the files were released that showed this was a lie, that's when the king went into really, I surprised me how brutal and severe the punishment was. But the king was quite clear: "You have lied. This is atrocious. I'm taking away all your titles, all your honours. You're out of the house. You're going to essentially live in internal exile in Norfolk, and no one ever wants to see you again." That's where we are now. So that was I think the king at that point, he'd just run out of patience. So to start with, he was charitable, but when it turned out that Andrew was lying, the king was extremely, went far beyond I think anyone expected. I mean, the last person to be sacked as a prince, if you like, to have his prince title taken away, was a grandson of Queen Victoria, who was a traitor in the First World War and was fighting on the enemy side. So Andrew has effectively been bracketed by his brother alongside a traitor. So that's how bad it is.
Agreed, agreed. You reveal moments where Queen Elizabeth was close to being overwhelmed. Do you think the public myth of her being unshakable actually did her a disservice in understanding the pressure she was under?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think that there's certainly a degree of truth there. I mean, I think we all thought the Queen was indestructible, and therefore, I think people just assume, when things went wrong, oh, she'll cope. And she did endure some. I mean, the sort of things that would put a lot of us on sort of therapy for life. I mean, if you think back to that appalling morning in 1982 when she woke up to find a barefoot man at the end of her bed holding a broken glass ashtray with blood dripping all over the floor. And she thinks, well, what's happening? What's he going to do? Some people's reaction would be to sort of scream, run. Anyway, she kept him talking. She was pressing her alarm bell. Nothing happened. It was a complete security meltdown. I mean, the inquiries afterwards went on and on because it was a serious breach of all sorts of security protocols. But she managed to keep the guy, who's called Michael Fagan. She kept him talking until eventually a maid came in and came out with the immortal line, "Flippin' heck, man, what's he doing in here?" And security was called, and the man was bundled off. But she managed to keep this guy talking, just keep him sort of sane and stop him attacking her for several minutes in this terrifying situation. But what I think is most extraordinary of all is that very same morning, 11 a.m. that morning, she was hosting an investiture at the palace. Hundreds of people were about to turn up to receive decorations and medals. She didn't want to let them down. And there she was on parade at 11. No one had the faintest idea what she'd just been through. And so those were the sort of things she was putting up with. And because of that, I think we thought she was, as I said, indestructible. But she's human. She's fallible. And there was a moment there was a moment in 1969 when it all just became a bit too much. In the summer of '69, Prince Charles was being invested. It was like a sort of mini coronation for Charles as Prince of Wales in Wales in this old castle. And there'd been a lot of Welsh terrorist activity going on. Welsh separatists had been planting bombs all over the place and the run up to this event. And the Queen was very worried about it. And even on the procession to and from this ceremony in the open top carriage, and they could hear a bomb explode in the distance. It was that bad, and she was just very worried. It was the same summer as the first ever royal TV documentary. There was huge interest on the family. This event was being televised live. There were bombs going off, and it just all came to a head. And when that event was over, she just disappeared. It was very odd. She just vanished, and she just took to her bed. And the palace put out a sort of statement saying the Queen has a case. She's suffering from flu, which is an odd thing to be suffering from in July, but that's what they said. And no one saw her for a week. And it was years later, talking to a senior member of her staff, said it was nervous exhaustion. It wasn't quite a breakdown, but it was nervous exhaustion. She just had to just press the pause button, and it happened so rarely, and no one really noticed. But what is interesting that year is at the end of that year, the only year of her reign, she didn't make a Christmas broadcast. Instead, she just said, "Oh, you can repeat the royal documentary." So that was the one year when I think she just felt, "I've done enough this year. I'm just going to take it easy for a bit."
Is this the same documentary that this isn't the same documentary that they shut up into a vault and went into hiding,
Yes,
right?
yep,
Oh, it
yep.
is.
Yes,
Oh,
it
oh.
is the same one. It's called Royal Family, and it was the first ever royal documentary. Um, e- Essentially, the family had by the end of the '60s, they were starting to look a bit out of date, a bit behind the curve. The outside world was sort of swinging '60s and hippies and pop music and Woodstock and everything. And the royal family still looked like this sort of semi-Edwardian family, sort of still riding around in carriages and things. So the view was, look, we need to do something to move with the times, and also because Prince Charles was being made Prince of Wales, it was like, well, let's make a film to show what the monarchy does, to show that what lies ahead for him. So this extraordinary documentary was made, and suddenly the world was allowed to see the royal family having a barbecue, seeing the Queen taking Prince Edward to a shop to buy an ice cream. I mean, just sort of ordinary stuff, but it was absolutely mind-boggling. It was so extraordinary in Britain that more people that summer, it was in the summer of '69, it came out literally, weeks apart from man landing on the moon. More people in Britain watched the royal family documentary than watched man landing on the moon. It was that big. And there is this sort of media myth that this documentary was somehow an embarrassment, that it was a failure. The Netflix series The Crown makes out that it was some sort of failure and it was locked away. It wasn't a failure at all. It was the most watched TV documentary in history. It was distributed to 120 countries and territories around the world. It was shown in the US several times, but it was always going to be time limited. It was not going to be something that just sat there forever, because it was a portrait, a sort of snapshot in time, and particularly for the younger members of the family. You got at one point Prince Edward bursts into tears. He gets upset. I mean, if you've got that kind of constantly being reshown when you're a teenager, it's a bit unfair. So it was shown. I think it was repeated 11 times in Britain over a number of years. And then in the early '70s, the decision was taken. Right, that's it. We're locking it away now, and it's to this day it's not being reshown. It sits in a vault. But if I'm a documentary maker as well as an author, and occasionally when you're making a documentary, you can take clips from it, but it has not been seen in its entirety since the early '70s.
I think that is a great example of the strategy and the experts that are working behind the scenes, because to have that documentary disappear and to not have it be repeated constantly, it adds to the mystique and the people whispering about when they did have access to it, or do you remember that? And I
Yeah.
think that there's something that does not benefit Harry and Meghan to have the Harry and Meghan documentary available to or docu-series available to us 24/7 whenever we want to see it, and the
Yeah,
curtsy and all of that
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, once you do put stuff out there now, it's there forever. And I mean that just shows the sort of the remarkable span of the Queen's reign. When she started, most people didn't have a TV set. What there was on TV was incredibly respectful. I mean, at one point, the BBC even received a complaint from the palace for filming the Queen driving in through the gates of Balmoral, and the complaint was, "Well, Balmoral is private property, and you film the Queen on private property. Do not do this again." I mean, today, you think what goes out on the airwaves now and on social media is completely different, and she had to adapt through, the advent of very respectful TV to less respectful TV to 24/7 news to social media and everything else. And yet, the respect for her and affection for her, it was the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think, a remarkable case of adapting. And she was, of course, the longest serving regular broadcaster in world history, because she did her first broadcast in 1940 as a 14-year-old princess at the height of the Blitz in the Second World War. And she did this sweet little recorded radio message with her sister to all the children who'd been evacuated during the war. And it was a sort of message of reassurance, really, to sort of say, look, it's all going to be okay. Don't worry. And it was a charming broadcast. And it went down so well that it was actually turned into a record in the USA. It was sold as a disc. So she had her first hit in the US, age 14 in 1940. And that
Queen
voice,
Elizabeth and Justin Bieber. Who knew?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, she was a teen sensation, and she didn't even sing a note either. It was just a sort of all will be well. And that came out, and of course she was broadcasting. I mean, not all the time, but I mean on and off from that moment for the next 80 years. So she I think she can hold the record. She got a gold disc from the music industry. She did a concert at her Golden Jubilee in Buckingham Palace with all sorts of stars there, like Paul McCartney and Elton John and people like that. And the CD for that sold so many copies that she got a gold disc, like a
Hilarious.
sort of pop star. And it used to hang on the wall at Buckingham Palace. I've seen it there.
That's so fun. You sorry for not like warning you about this question, but based on some of the things you just said, based on just visioning the evolution that you talked about that we've gone through digitally and technology wise, I think it's really kind of vulgar to use Queen Elizabeth and AI. I do still have that respect for her. I do still think that she's kind of a sacred character. Do you have an opinion there? And do you feel like the palace has any control over that? Because you see like these videos circulating where she's rapping or she's
Yes,
dancing, and it's sweet. I think that people are just having fun, but I also am like, ooh, that makes me extremely uncomfortable.
yeah, that's so interesting you say that. I mean, yeah, I'm with you on that. Half of me thinks, well, it's a sort of backhanded tribute. I mean, the fact that millions of people around the world are enjoying a sort of a meme or whatever you call it of the sort of the Queen sort of, as you say, sort of rapping or swearing or singing in Chinese or whatever it might be. In one sense, the fact that people have gone to all that trouble just shows that she is this enduring figure. But yeah, at the same time, there is that sense of, leave her alone. I mean,
Yeah.
she's just a bit, she's other. It's why a lot of people were very unhappy about the series, The Crown, because on the one hand, it showed her star power. I mean, the fact that a major international network was making a 60-part drama of her whole life on a kind of Hollywood budget, something like I think it was $12 million an episode or something. Serious stuff. I mean that's obviously a reflection of her importance and her stature as a world figure. Yes. On the other hand, would you make a biopic of somebody who's not only alive, and it was all filmed while she was alive, but also while they're still in the job? And I
Right.
don't think you would. And it took great liberties with a lot of personal moments, made things up. And a lot of people were upset about that. But her own view was she was just very phlegmatic about these things. It was just like, oh, well, never mind. I'm not going to watch it. Life's too short. Let's get on and do something else.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think that that would be the attitude here too. Like, well, I mean, I can't. Those moves are though. I can't do that. I can't do that cartwheel. But I'll focus on what really matters.
Yeah.
So you do have incredible access to people, including perspectives from people like President Trump. What did world leaders understand about the Queen that the public didn't have access to? And I mean, that Donald Trump, what a crush he has on this family. It kind of tickles me every time he talks about them. So I can't imagine what it was like for you to interview him about this subject.
Oh well, it was extraordinary. He was to begin. He didn't start very well because it was about 4 months ago. I went to see him and was told he'll meet you at the golf club, and I was met him at his golf club and said, "It's very kind of you to give me an interview, Mr. President." He said, "I'm not here to do interviews. No one told me about an interview. I'm here to play golf.
Oh
Do
gosh.
you play golf?" And I said, "I'm afraid I don't." He went, "You don't play golf and you're British? What?" So it was like, okay, this is going really well. He doesn't want to do an interview, and I don't play golf. And then I said, but I'm just here because I'm writing this biography of the Queen. You were the last state visitor of her record-breaking reign. You clearly got on. I just wondered if you had, some thoughts about that. And at which point he said, "Do you want something to eat?" So we sat down and had breakfast, and he does love talking about. He was just very fond of her, and it was very straightforward. There was, it wasn't particularly, boastful or indiscreet. It was just, she was great. She kept saying she was unbelievable. He loved the fact that he kept trying to tease out of her who her favorite presidents were, and she just wouldn't say. And then he said, "Okay, what about prime ministers? Who's your favorite prime minister?" And she just sort of wouldn't play ball. And that was their first meeting. That was back in 2018. And they got on, and their first meeting was meant to be a sort of 20-minute courtesy call at Windsor Castle. And it sort of went on, it went on for about an hour. And everyone was looking at their watches. And it just, they got on. She found that he was very courteous, that he was, very attentive. One word she used about him, which was a positive word coming from the Queen. She found him amusing.
Mm.
And he thought she was great. They both found that in common they had both had Scottish mothers, which was a sort of a commonality, and so was the fact that they both had fairly substantial properties in Scotland. Queen's got Balmoral and the Highlands and lots of other stuff, and President Trump has two golf courses there. So there was that sort of, they got on that front. And then the following year he came back on his state visit, and it coincided with the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And D-Day is a really big deal for the Queen, the last world leader to wear uniform in the Second World War. And she always took that very seriously. And she always took the transatlantic alliance very seriously. To her, as a kid growing up at the start of the Second World War, when at any minute Britain could be invaded, and if it did get invaded, the chances were she and her family would be put up against a wall and shot like the Romanovs in Russia. So, you're growing up with that sort of terrible thought in your mind. And then suddenly the US enters the war, and it's like the sort of cavalry coming to the rescue. So for her, that was always America was a sort of represented salvation, but also glamour. She loved Hollywood. She loved Hollywood musicals. She loved Hollywood films. Um, in the immediate aftermath of the war, London was a very boring place. But the one thing she loved doing was going to see a production of Oklahoma. She saw it time and again. And when she was dating Prince Philip, there's a song from Oklahoma that became their song. And she all things, to her, America was all about sort of saving the world, excitement, glamour, fun, can do. So all those things come together. That's why she loved, D-Day. She was always, whenever there was a big anniversary of D-Day, she was always there. So when Donald Trump came back in 2019 for a state visit and to mark D-Day, that was actually turned out to be the last state visit of her reign. By then she was very old, but she loved that whole anniversary. And so that, again, there was that sort of bonding with President Trump over that. And of course, I mean, he would have all sorts of issues with the British government. I mean, golly, he's got plenty of angry words to say about Downing Street. But certainly when I talk to him, and as I've seen since, he puts the monarchy in a very different place. There's the politicians, they do their stuff, I'll shout at them. The royals, they do their thing, and I don't shout at them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is fascinating. I'm sure this was fun for you to study the Queen's ability to get along with difficult, unpopular characters, and the fact that she had to ignore that and she
Mm,
just knew she had a job to do.
mm,
And the ultimate objective was peace. And she seemed to maintain that. And I think we could all learn a lot from that lesson. Sometimes we have to associate with people that we don't necessarily like, and
mm,
we just have to get on with it, and we have to ensure that um, we make peace at the end of the day. And I think we
mm.
might see that in a week with
Yeah.
King Charles.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they will get on absolutely fine. I've no doubt. President Trump will want to make this visit a success. So will the King. There'll be a lot of elephants in the room that no one will be discussing. I'm sure we won't hear anything about Andrew or Harry and Meghan or whatever. But this visit is actually, I mean, it was always going to happen. Whoever was the monarch and whoever was the president, because it's the 250th birthday of the USA, and in the same way that the 200th. I mean, the Queen loved the bicentenary. 1976, Britain was in a terrible state. I mean, the economy was shot through. We were nearly bankrupt. The whole country was falling apart. But the one thing we had was the Queen, and
A
she
party.
sailed off. So yeah, she sailed off to the US in her yacht, sailed into Philadelphia, and went all up the east coast of the US and had a great time, and lots of jokes about George the Third. Oh dear, that didn't go too well, and all that kind of stuff. And she went shopping at Bloomingdale's in New York, and it was great. And so that was the 200th. Now we've got the 250th. So it was clear that whoever was monarch would, if it was the Queen or whoever it was going to be here in the US to mark this big moment, whoever was in the White House. And
Mhm.
so this visit is framed against that, against all this history. And actually, it's set against 250 years of history in the First World War and the Second World War and all the stuff that Britain and America have done together, and all the and the odd embarrassing moment like burning down the White House in 1814, but we won't dwell on that. All all these things are part of a huge 250-year tableau of history. So that's what they're going to be celebrating. And in the scheme of that, an issue with a dodgy brother or a dodgy son, it's minor stuff.
Right, absolutely. You do dissect the Queen's most difficult years throughout the book. Based on your research, do you believe that the Queen considered Princess Diana a liability to the future of the monarchy? Like
Mm,
she was in a way very similar to Prince Harry, just very unpredictable and very self-serving. I think that Diana is not as bad as Prince Harry, to be quite honest. In some ways, I don't think Diana wanted to hurt the institution as much as she wanted to hurt her ex-husband.
mm.
But was the Queen worried about her?
I think the Queen, as with so many of these situations, it was a much more sort of nuanced picture. I mean, there were moments when, yeah, she would be exasperated by Diana. She often couldn't quite work out why Diana would behave the way she did, and why can't she just sort of come down and have lunch or whatever. I mean, she was of her generation, the Queen. She was of that wartime generation where you just got on with it. And Diana really was the first member of the family to sort of start talking about things like, mental health and therapy and those sort of things, which I mean, the Queen just didn't really understand. And she did find that by the time Diana was on the airwaves, calling into question Charles's suitability as king, I mean, that was a moment where the Queen definitely saw Diana not as a threat, but certainly as this is a problem. We've got to sort this out. But she was always at heart, the family side of the Queen would acknowledge that Diana was a great mother, adored her children, they adored her. She acknowledged that Charles could be quite difficult at times as well. So she was never completely binary on these things. She'd always have she would be very understanding, and we saw that notably with her sister. I mean, Princess Margaret could drive everybody up the wall. She could be incredibly difficult and incredibly difficult to her sister. But I mean, the Queen always had that sort of soft spot for her, and was always, I think, she would always try and see both sides of someone. She wouldn't just say that person is dreadful. You know, she'd try and look at, okay, well, what's the problem here? And with what Harry called himself the spare. I think the Queen had a great deal of sympathy for spares in general because her dad was a spare. He was never meant to be king, and it's why she had a real soft spot for Margaret. She understood that Margaret, she Elizabeth had everything on a plate. She had all the palaces and the education and everything, and Margaret didn't. And she understood that made it difficult, and that's why she had sympathy for Margaret. That's why she had sympathy for Andrew, and it's why she had sympathy for Harry. And she was always, I think, she was a very Christian soul. You know, she was always prepared to give people the benefit of the doubt. But if they really let her down, then there's no coming back.
Well, I love that you described her as a very Christian soul. That probably made my entire interview. So thanks for that. Do you think, based on what you've seen over the last few weeks, that the Queen would have considered Harry and Meghan a liability? Australia looked a lot like a royal trip with all of the, you know, minimal monetization whenever they could fit it in.
Yeah, I think she'd have clearly found been pretty disappointed by that trip. But I don't think she saw them as a serious liability to the monarchy because, as I said, they weren't, you know, in the direct line of succession. I mean, they were certainly had a capacity to make life difficult and embarrass the monarchy, and certainly when they did their TV interview and started making accusations of racism, that was probably the moment. That of all the things they did, that would be the one that the Queen found the most hurtful because her sort of life's work, in a sense, was the Commonwealth, was this transition from Britain as a former imperial power to having this free and entirely sort of friendly association of independent nations, a completely multiracial organization, the Commonwealth. The Queen was devoted to it. So to have members of the family allege racism in the institution, that was a low blow, and I think that she found that very painful. And that's of course when she came out with her immortal line, "Recollections may vary," which I think was a brilliant sort of classic bit of Elizabeth II. I mean, on the one hand, it's sort of not saying anything, and on the other hand, it's saying everything. And it's doing it very elegantly and very forcefully, but actually not without sort of insulting anyone. It's a masterpiece, really, and that it sums her up.
Yeah, I mean, probably unaware she was creating a pop culture moment because I say it any chance I get. Somebody says, I know I saw you wearing my sweater. Recollections may vary. I don't have that
Yeah,
sweater. I don't know what
yeah,
you're talking about. Uh,
yeah.
Can you
That's
tell me
true.
about the line that in the book you talk about how Queen Elizabeth detected narcissistic behavior on the part of Meghan? That kind of that surprised me because, like you said, we do think of her as just this very sweet, saintly grandmother figure. And that's one of those great observations that you do want to listen to over tea.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, she was always very discreet about what she said, but I spoke to people who were around her, who were very close to her, and she wouldn't overtly want to criticize Harry's wife, but she made it quite clear, particularly towards the end after they'd left, that she'd really made a very great effort to make a success of their royal life, and I think she felt very disappointed by it. And I think there was definitely a sense, or those around her were certain that she saw narcissistic tendencies in well, in both of them, but in the way that Meghan behaved towards people. I mean, there's one bit in the book I mention actually where and Harry points this out. I mean, Harry makes a number of very interesting observations in his book, Spare, but he talks about how a member of their staff had to be dismissed for taking or asking for freebies. And freebies are being given things for free. That just doesn't happen in royal circles. And yet, a few pages later in the book, he talks about how Meghan was very nice and kind, and she used to share her freebies with the staff. So it's like, hang on, if freebies aren't allowed, where are these freebies that she's sharing coming from?
Yeah.
And what I discovered in the book was that some of the Queen's staff, had to very, gently but pointedly, make it clear to the Sussexes that the royal family don't do freebies.
Mm. Right. No, it's very important. And now we see a lot of freebies going on. So that was clearly something that had bothered them. You discussed the tiara episode in your book as well. I just feel like if I was having a very pivotal transitional moment in my life. I'm being introduced to the British or to the world thanks to my relationship and marrying into the British royal family. I would be more cautious about things like this because we're now associating Harry and Meghan with a very petty issue. Um, what was going on then? Was it just emotions heightened because of Meghan's father? I mean, I just think I would be more aware of the situation and go, I'm going to take a step back because if it ever gets out that I'm pitching a fit over a tiara, God help me. It just feels like this is a moment that she'll never be able to shake.
Well, again, it's one of those moments that it was a recollections may vary moment, and then Harry stuck it in his book, so he described it, and he put out his version, which was that Meghan, the Queen, had offered Meghan a tiara to borrow for the wedding, and that they then needed it for this hair rehearsal, and that the Queen's dresser, Angela Kelly, was making it very difficult for Meghan to get hold of the tiara, and it was all yeah. I mean, it's an incredibly sort of petty
And
issue
then
in one sense.
we all have a fake tiara, Robert. Okay,
You've
we
got it.
all
You've
have
got it.
one ready to go in
Well,
case we need
that's
to style our hair. All right.
yeah. Well, that was it, and it was a number of things were interesting when I dug down and actually heard the real story about this, because for the Queen this was a sort of bonding moment. Every time there was a royal wedding, she loved just having a sort of like a sort of girls moment, if you like, just me and the
Oh,
bride, and we'll
yeah.
we'll get to just sort of have a nice time. We'll look at a few tiaras and then you can choose one. And it was a sort of, someone put it to me, it was a bonding moment. So Meghan was invited round to come and look. But I know Harry comes too. So that kind of immediately sort of slightly changes the dynamics. And she chooses a tiara and it's all fine. But you have to be very careful with royal jewels because that some of them have quite awkward pasts. So having chosen, right, this is the one I want, says Meghan. The Queen says that's great. Then her sort of staff just want to check it out, just want to make, because it was quite a rare specimen. It hadn't been seen for years, and the diamonds had been given to Queen Mary about 100 years earlier by some aristocrats, but no one was quite sure where those diamonds had come from. So there was just sort of due diligence to be done to make sure that the last thing they wanted was sort of Meghan to suddenly appear on her wedding day and someone to stand up and say that's been stolen from my ancestral land, or that's actually that's got a curse on it, or that used to belong to a very naughty person.
Right.
So yeah, it was just sort of that process was going on, and then suddenly Harry's on the phone, sort of demanding the tiara because Meghan's hairdresser is flying in, and he's very busy and he hasn't got long, and he wants this tiara because they're going to have a hair rehearsal. And it's interesting that it's Harry doing all the calling. It's all through this drama. It's Harry's on the phone, Harry's shouting at people. Meghan stands back. I mean, clearly she's asked him to do this, but I'll let Harry do the shouting. And he's starting to really upset people, and it gets back to the Queen, and she comes out with the immortal line, "Well, it's not a toy." And then, as she said, she remembered that in the run-up to the wedding of Catherine and William, exactly as you've done there, Kinsey, that Catherine had a £5 plastic tiara from I think it was a shop called Claire's Accessories. It's a sort of
Yeah.
high street chain in Britain, and that was fine. So why can't she do that? And then finally, the tiara is sort of brought up, And it's quite a hassle moving very expensive bits of royal jewelry around. You don't just sort of stick them in with a courier or put them in the post. I mean, they've got to be brought by secure means and signed for and all this. And it finally arrives, and Harry is very dismissive and just sort of goes, "Oh, is that it?" And then is very direct with the Queen's dresser, who is pretty direct back. So yeah, it's a recollections may vary moment, but yeah, I think for future royal brides, if someone offers to lend you a tiara, just say thank you and wait till the wedding day.
Yeah, figure it out. Go to Claire's. We've all been there to get our ears pierced. It's not that hard. Uh, my last question is, after everything you uncovered, do you think the model of leadership embodied by Queen Elizabeth is still sustainable for the modern monarchy? Do they have to pivot? Do they want to pivot? What are you observing?
Another good question. I think it's what she showed as you move with the times. You might look as though you absolutely you're hidebound by tradition and we're going to do it this way because that's the way we've always done it. But actually, she was very good at moving with the times, never ahead of the times. You never want to be, leading fashion. You don't really want to be in fashion because then you get out of fashion. You just want to be reliable and authentic. And I think the way she did it, it's quite clear that King Charles is following her kind of playbook. So out in public, very public facing, but she never gave interviews while she was queen, and he stopped giving interviews. I mean, I've interviewed him many times as prince. I made a program with him for his 60th birthday, but now he's king. He's not doing sit down interviews anymore. You have to be completely neutral. And I think the way that was she was able to distinguish very clearly between royalty and celebrity, and they get that. And I interviewed Prince William some years ago about her, and he came up with a great line. He said, "She cares not for celebrity, that's for sure." And I think the great irony was she was the most famous woman in the whole world, and she didn't give a damn about fame.
Yeah, I love that. I love that too. All right, Elizabeth II in Private and Public, The Inside Story is available wherever you buy your books online now. And you can keep up with Robert Hardman at Hardman R on Twitter. Or X as the kids are calling it today, and Robert underscore Hardman underscore official on Instagram. Robert Hardman, what a pleasure it is to finally get to spend some time with you. Again, congratulations on all of your
Thank you.
success. I hope you're so proud of the beautiful book that you built. I know you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it.
Well, thank you, Kinsey. It's been a great pleasure to be on this wonderful podcast, and thanks for your time. And my very best to California.
Thanks. All right, agree with us, disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you again soon.